A rich man fell down right there in the little coffee shop. Then this black waitress did something that changed everything. You know what? Sometimes the richest folks in the world can lose it all in just one heartbeat. It was 7:23 on a wet Tuesday morning when James Richardson sat all by himself in Maple Street Café. His hands were shaking real bad as he looked down at those divorce papers his wife sent him, spread out on that old wooden table. This man had more money than he could ever spend, but he was sitting there, broken like a lost child. The rain was hitting the windows hard, and inside that warm little cafe, James felt colder than he'd ever been in his whole life. He'd built an empire, made billions of dollars, but right there in that moment, staring at those papers that meant his family was gone, he realized he had nothing at all. The waitress, Denise, had been watching him from behind the counter. She'd seen plenty of broken hearts come through those doors, but something about this man's pain touched her deep inside. She didn't know he was some big-shot businessman. All she saw was a human being falling apart, and her heart just went out to him. That morning was going to change both their lives forever. Sometimes God puts people exactly where they need to be, right when they need to be there. And sometimes the person who saves you is the one you'd never expect. James Richardson pressed his palms against his temples, trying to stop the pounding in his head. The divorce papers blurred before his eyes as rain streaked down the cafe windows like tears he couldn't shed. His phone buzzed against the wooden table, and Patricia's name lit up the screen. For a moment, hope flickered in his chest. Maybe she was calling to say they could work things out. Maybe. The text message that appeared made his blood run cold. The kids asked why Daddy doesn't live here anymore. Emma cried for an hour. Lucas won't even say your name. I can't keep protecting you from the consequences of your choices. They need to know their father chose his company over his family. The phone slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering against the table. 20 feet away, Denise Washington dried her hands on her apron, watching the well-dressed man who'd been sitting in the corner booth for the past hour. She'd served enough broken people to recognize the signs. The way his shoulders curved inward like he was protecting himself from invisible blows. The way he stared at those papers without really seeing them. James tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The cafe seemed to tilt sideways, and a crushing weight settled across his chest. He couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, suffocating. His heart hammered against his ribs with an irregular, violent rhythm that made him gasp. "Sir? Sir, are you all right?" Denise's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. James looked up to find her standing beside his table, her dark eyes filled with genuine concern. He tried to speak, but only managed a strangled sound. The crushing sensation in his chest intensified, radiating down his left arm like molten fire. "I can't," he wheezed, clawing at his collar. "I can't breathe." Denise had seen this before. Her father had clutched his chest the same way, with that same look of desperate confusion, 3 years ago in their tiny apartment. She didn't hesitate. "Call 911!" she shouted to Maria, the other waitress behind the counter. Her hands found James's wrist, checking for a pulse. It was rapid and erratic, like a bird trapped in a cage. "I need you to stay calm, honey. Look at me." James's vision blurred as sweat broke out across his forehead. The cafe spun around him, faces becoming indistinct shapes. Only Denise's voice anchored him to consciousness. "What's your name?" she asked, her fingers already reaching for the phone Maria thrust toward her. "James," he gasped. "James Richardson." The name meant nothing to Denise, but she could hear the terror in his voice. She knelt beside his chair, one hand on his shoulder, the other holding the phone. 911, what's your emergency?" "I need an ambulance at Maple Street Cafe on 5th Avenue. Middle-aged man, possible heart attack. He's conscious but experiencing severe chest pain and difficulty breathing." James tried to focus on her face, this stranger who'd appeared like an angel in his darkest moment. Her skin was smooth and warm, her expression calm despite the crisis unfolding before her. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't running away. She was simply there, present in a way no one had been for him in years. "The ambulance is 5 minutes out," she told him, setting the phone aside. "I need you to try to relax. Don't fight it. Just breathe with me, slow and steady." But James couldn't slow down anything. His mind raced with fragments of memory and regret. Emma's last dance recital, where his empty chair had sat in the front row while he closed a deal in Singapore. Lucas's championship soccer game, missed because of an emergency board meeting that could have waited. Patricia's birthday dinner, where he'd answered 3 calls before she'd finally stopped trying to talk to him. "My children," he whispered, and Denise heard something break in his voice that had nothing to do with his heart. "Tell me about them," she said, her hand finding his and squeezing gently. "Emma. She's 6. She loves butterflies and she wanted me to take her to the butterfly garden last month." His breathing was shallow, labored. "Lucas plays soccer. He scored 3 goals last week and I missed it." Denise felt the tremor in his hand, saw the way tears mixed with sweat on his face. This wasn't just a heart attack. This was a soul breaking apart. "They love you," she said simply. "That's why it hurts so much." James looked at her with something approaching wonder. This woman, this stranger, understood what his business partners, his lawyers, his entire professional world had never grasped. Love was supposed to heal, but it could also destroy you when you realized you'd thrown it away. The sirens were getting closer now, their wail cutting through the morning rain. Other customers had cleared away from their table, giving them space. Maria hovered nearby with a glass of water, her face tight with worry. "I don't want to die," James said, and the naked honesty in his voice made Denise's throat tighten. "You're not going to die. Not today. Not on my watch." But even as she said it, she could see him growing paler. His grip on her hand was weakening, and his eyes kept losing focus. The paramedics burst through the cafe door, their equipment clanging against the narrow entrance. "Over here," Denise called, not letting go of James's hand. The lead paramedic, a compact woman with graying hair, knelt beside James and immediately began checking his vitals. Her partner, a tall man with calloused hands, started setting up the portable EKG machine. "When did the symptoms start?" the woman asked. "About 10 minutes ago," Denise answered when James couldn't. "Sudden onset, chest pain, shortness of breath, sweating. Any history of heart problems?" James managed to shake his head, but Denise could see the effort it cost him. The EKG machine began its electronic symphony, printing out a strip of paper that made the lead paramedic frown. "We need to get you to the hospital right now," she told James, her voice urgent but controlled. "You're having a significant cardiac event." They transferred him to the stretcher with practiced efficiency, but James's eyes never left Denise's face. She walked alongside the stretcher as they moved toward the ambulance, rain soaking through her uniform. "Will you—" James's voice was barely audible over the storm. "Will you come?" Denise glanced at Maria, who nodded immediately. "Go," the older woman said. "I'll cover your shift." The back of the ambulance was a cramped world of beeping machines and urgent voices. Denise sat on the narrow bench, watching the paramedics work over James with swift competence. They'd started an IV, given him medication, attached a dozen wires to his chest. But through it all, his eyes kept finding hers. "What's your name?" he asked during a brief moment when the paramedic stepped back to radio the hospital. "Denise Washington." "Denise," he repeated, like he was committing it to memory. "Thank you." She wanted to tell him not to thank her yet, that she'd only done what anyone would do. But looking at this broken man, she realized that wasn't true. Most people would have called 911 and stepped back. Most people wouldn't have held a stranger's hand while his world collapsed around him. The hospital came into view through the small window, its emergency entrance blazing with fluorescent light, despite the gray morning. James's condition had stabilized somewhat during the ride, but Denise could see the fear still lurking in his eyes. Not fear of dying, exactly, but fear of living with the consequences of choices he couldn't undo. As they wheeled him toward the emergency room doors, James caught her hand one more time. "My phone," he said. "There's a text. From my wife. She thinks I chose my company over my family." Denise squeezed his fingers gently. "Did you?" The question hung between them as the hospital doors swung open and a team of doctors surrounded the stretcher. James was swept away into the controlled chaos of emergency medicine, leaving Denise standing in the hallway, still holding his phone. She looked down at the device, its screen dark and innocent. Whatever message had triggered this crisis was locked inside, waiting. Around her, the hospital hummed with quiet urgency. Nurses moved with purpose. Families waited in plastic chairs. And somewhere in the maze of corridors, James Richardson was fighting for his life. Denise had seen enough heartbreak to know that sometimes the body gave out when the soul couldn't take any more. This man had money, success, everything the world said should make him happy. But he was dying inside, and his heart had finally decided to make the pain visible. She settled into one of the waiting room chairs, James's phone heavy in her palm. Outside, the storm was intensifying, and she wondered if his family even knew what was happening. She wondered if they would care. But mostly, she wondered what had broken him so completely that his own heart had turned against him, and whether it was too late to put the pieces back together. The fluorescent lights in the ICU hummed with mechanical indifference as Dr. Phillips emerged from James's room, his expression carrying the weight of difficult conversations. Denise rose from her chair, James's phone still clutched in her hand like a lifeline to a world that might not want to be reached. "How is he?" she asked, though the doctor's furrowed brow already suggested the answer wouldn't be simple. Dr. Phillips removed his glasses, cleaning them with deliberate slowness. "Stable, for now. But Mrs. Washington, Denise Washington. I'm not family, You saved his life." The doctor's words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. "The paramedics said you administered CPR for nearly 8 minutes. Without that." Denise nodded, unable to process the magnitude of what those minutes had meant. In the harsh hospital lighting, she looked smaller somehow, her waitress uniform wrinkled and coffee-stained, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection surrounding them. "There's something else," Dr. Phillips continued, his voice dropping to the tone reserved for delivering life-altering news. "The damage to his heart is significant. We're talking about major lifestyle changes, assuming he survives the next 48 hours. The words landed like physical blows. Denise found herself thinking about Michael, about how she'd explained to her 8-year-old son why Mama was spending the night at a hospital with a stranger, about the shift she'd already missed at the café, the tips she couldn't afford to lose. "Can I see him?" Dr. Phillips hesitated. "Are you sure? He's sedated, and visiting hours. Please." Something in her voice, perhaps the same quality that had compelled her to risk everything for a stranger that morning, made him step aside. James looked impossibly fragile against the white sheets, his face pale as winter moonlight. The monitors surrounding his bed created a symphony of beeps and whispers, each sound a reminder of how close he'd come to silence. Denise pulled a chair close to his bedside, James's phone resting on her lap like a question she wasn't sure she wanted to answer. The screen had been lighting up sporadically with notifications. Missed calls, text messages, emails marked urgent, an entire world demanding his attention, unaware that the man they needed was fighting for each breath. When his eyes finally fluttered open near midnight, the first thing he saw was Denise's silhouette against the dim room lighting. "You're still here," he whispered, his voice rough as sandpaper. Someone needed to be. James tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at the IV lines threading through his arm. My family. Did anyone? Denise lifted his phone, the weight of it suddenly feeling enormous. I didn't know who to call. Your emergency contacts. They're all business associates. The silence that followed spoke volumes about the life James had constructed around himself. Success measured in quarterly reports and stock prices. But no one listed who would care if he simply disappeared. There was a text, Denise said carefully, from Patricia, about the kids. James closed his eyes, and for a moment she thought he'd drifted back to sleep. When he spoke again, his words came out broken, fragmented. She's taking them to her mother's. In Denver. Says she can't. Can't watch me destroy myself anymore. Says the children ask why Daddy doesn't come home, and she's tired of making excuses. Denise had spent years watching heartbreak walk through the doors of Maple Street Café. Divorced fathers picking up kids for weekend visits that felt more like interviews. Single mothers working double shifts to fill the space left by absent partners. But this felt different. Raw. Like watching someone bleed out emotionally in real time. When did you last see them? She asked. Emma's dance recital. 3 weeks ago. James's laugh held no humor. I sat in the back, answered emails during her performance, left before it ended for a conference call with Tokyo. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, but Denise could hear something changing in James's breathing. Not medical distress, but the kind of suffocation that comes from finally seeing yourself clearly. Lucas has a soccer game every Saturday. I promised I'd come. Bought him new cleats. $40 cleats for a 10-year-old. His voice was growing stronger, but not in a good way. Never showed up. Not once. Denise thought about Michael's school art show the previous month, how her son had saved her a seat in the front row, even though she'd been running late from a double shift, how his face had lit up when she'd finally rushed in, still wearing her apron, just as his name was called. You can still, she began. No. James's interruption was sharp enough to cut. You don't understand. I had everything, and I threw it away for numbers on a screen. Board meetings and profit margins and stock options. I chose a corporation over my children. The room seemed to contract around them, the machines beeping growing more insistent. James was working himself up, his heart rate climbing as the full weight of his choices crashed down on him. They're better off without me, he continued, his words tumbling out like a confession years in the making. Patricia's right. I'm poison. Everything I touch turns into another deadline, another deal, another reason to be somewhere else. Stop it. Denise's voice cut through his spiral with surprising authority. James looked at her, startled by the sudden steel in her tone. You want to know what I see when I look at you? She continued, rising from her chair to face him directly. I see a man who had a heart attack because he loves his family so much it was killing him. I see someone who carries divorce papers in his briefcase, but can't bring himself to sign them. You don't know. I know plenty. Denise was fully standing now, her small frame somehow commanding the entire room. I know you had your wife's number memorized even though it wasn't saved in your contacts. I know you whispered your children's names while the paramedics worked on you. I know, because I've been where you are. The confession hung in the air between them like a challenge. Michael's father left when I was 6 months pregnant, she continued, her voice steady despite the pain clearly visible in her eyes. Walked out because he said he wasn't ready to be a father. Said he had dreams, opportunities, a whole life ahead of him that didn't include changing diapers and paying for daycare. James found himself listening with an intensity that surprised him. Here was a woman who had every reason to judge him, to see him as just another selfish father who had abandoned his responsibilities. Instead, she was offering something he hadn't expected: understanding. You know what the difference is between you and him? Denise asked. You're here. You're alive. You have a second chance that not everyone gets. It's too late, James whispered. Patricia's already decided. The kids. They probably don't even remember what I look like. Emma is 6 years old, and Lucas is 10. They remember everything. Every missed recital. Every broken promise. Every time you chose work over them. Denise's words were brutal in their honesty, but her tone remained gentle. But they also remember every bedtime story you did read, every soccer practice you did attend, every moment you were present instead of absent. The monitors showed James's heart rate spiking again, but this time it felt different. Not panic, but something closer to recognition. 3 weeks ago, you sat in the back of Emma's recital, Denise continued. But you showed up. You could have sent an assistant or made an excuse, but you were there. That matters. I left early, but you came. She moved closer to his bed, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of her own struggles that she carried every day. My son has never had that. Never had a father who cared enough to show up late or leave early or even disappoint him. He's had nothing. The silence that followed felt like a reckoning. I work double shifts at a diner to pay for his school supplies, Denise continued. I miss his games because I can't afford to take time off. I lie awake at night wondering if I'm enough, if I can give him what he needs without a father in his life. James found himself seeing her clearly for the first time. Not just the waitress who had saved his life, but a woman fighting battles that made his corporate struggles seem trivial by comparison. Your children have a father who loves them enough to let it break his heart, she said softly. That's more than some kids ever get. The question is, what are you going to do with that love now? Outside the hospital window, dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of possibility. James stared at the ceiling, feeling something shift inside him like tectonic plates rearranging themselves. I don't know how to be the father they need, he admitted. Neither did mine, Denise replied, but he figured it out. One day at a time, one choice at a time. The phone in her hand buzzed with another notification, another urgent email, another crisis that needed his immediate attention. Without hesitation, she powered it off. The world can wait, she said firmly. Your heart attack just bought you the most expensive wake-up call in history. Don't waste it. James looked at her, this woman who had risked her own job and safety to save a stranger's life, who was now offering him wisdom earned through struggles he was only beginning to understand. Why? He asked. Why are you doing this for me? Denise was quiet for a long moment, considering the question that seemed to encompass everything that had brought them to this moment. Because, she finally said, everyone deserves a chance to come home. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, but something fundamental had changed in the room. James Richardson, tech mogul and billionaire, was finally ready to face the most important decision of his life. And for the first time in years, money couldn't buy him the answer. The silence stretched between them until James slowly reached for his phone. His fingers, still weak from the medical episode, fumbled with the device before he set it face down on the bedside table. I need to make a call, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Denise nodded, gathering her purse. I'll give you some privacy. No. The word came out sharper than he intended. Stay, please. I need someone to witness this. She settled back into the chair, her dark eyes filled with quiet understanding. James picked up the phone again, his thumb hovering over Patricia's contact information. 3 years of marriage, 2 beautiful children. And it had come down to this moment in a sterile hospital room with a stranger who somehow understood him better than anyone in his inner circle. The phone rang twice before Patricia's voice came through, cautious and strained. James? I got the call from the hospital. Are you... I'm selling the company. The words hung in the air like a confession. On the other end of the line, he could hear Patricia's sharp intake of breath, the sound of her setting down whatever she'd been holding. "What did you just say?" "Richardson Technologies. I'm selling it. Everything. The patents, the offices, the whole empire." His voice grew stronger with each word. "I called Marcus from the ambulance. He's already putting together the paperwork." "James, you're not thinking clearly. You just had a heart attack. The doctors probably have you on medication that's affecting your judgment." Denise watched as James closed his eyes, his free hand pressing against his chest where the monitors tracked his heartbeat. "My judgment has never been clearer, Patricia. I built a company that stole my life. I became a father who doesn't know his children's favorite colors or what makes them laugh in the middle of the night. You're scaring me." "Good. I've been scared for months. Scared that Emma will grow up thinking love comes with conditions. Scared that Lucas will measure his worth by how much money he can make, instead of how much joy he can create. Scared that my son will become me." Through the phone, he could hear Patricia moving, probably pacing the way she did when she was processing difficult information. "Where will we live? The kids' schools? Their friends? The house in Vermont? Remember the one we looked at before Lucas was born? The one with the tire swing and the kitchen window that faces the mountains?" James opened his eyes, looking directly at Denise. "It's still for sale. I checked last month during one of those 3 a.m. moments when I couldn't sleep. James, we can't just uproot everything. We already did that. I uprooted us the moment I chose board meetings over bedtime stories. The moment I started measuring love in stock options and quarterly reports." His voice cracked slightly. "I want to come home, Patricia. Not to the penthouse. Not to the life we built around my work. I want to come home to you and the kids. And I want to learn how to be the man you fell in love with." The silence on the other end stretched so long that James wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Patricia's voice came through, softer now, tinged with something that might have been hope. "Emma asked me yesterday if Daddy was ever coming back. Not coming home from work, coming back. Like maybe the real you had gone somewhere and left behind this stranger who smells like expensive cologne and never has time for butterfly stories." James felt the tears slide down his cheek before he realized he was crying. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know. I'm coming back, Patricia. The real me. The one who used to make pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, and who knew that your favorite movie was The Princess Bride, because you said love should feel like an adventure." Denise quietly reached over and placed a tissue on the bedside table, her movements so gentle they barely registered. But James saw the gesture, and it reminded him that kindness didn't require grand declarations or expensive gifts. "The kids are at school," Patricia said after another long pause. "But they'll be home at 4. Can I? Would it be okay if I came by? Not to stay, not to pressure you, just to see them, to tell them myself. James, you just had a heart attack. You shouldn't be traveling." He looked at the monitors, at the steady green lines that proved his heart was still beating, still fighting. "The doctor said, if I take it easy, I can be discharged this afternoon. And Patricia, some things are more important than taking it easy. All right, 4:30. But James, if this is some kind of midlife crisis grand gesture that you'll regret in 6 months, it's not. I promise you, it's not." He met Denise's eyes as he spoke. "Someone reminded me today that children need presents, not presents. And I've been giving our kids very expensive absences." After the call ended, James set the phone down and looked at Denise, who had remained quietly supportive throughout the conversation. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what? For not letting me die alone in your café? For sitting with a stranger in a hospital room? For telling me the truth about my children when everyone else was too polite or too afraid to hurt my feelings?" Denise stood up, smoothing her uniform. "My shift starts in an hour. But before I go, I need to ask you something. Anything. This change you're making, this life you're choosing, are you doing it because you're scared of dying? Or because you want to learn how to live?" The question hit him like a physical blow. James had built his career on quick answers, on decisive action, on never showing uncertainty. But this woman, this waitress who made $12 an hour plus tips, had asked him the one question that mattered. "Both," he said honestly, "but mostly because I realized that I've been dead for years. I just kept breathing." Denise nodded slowly. "Then you have a chance. People who admit they're lost can find their way home. It's the ones who think they know where they are who stay lost forever." She moved toward the door, then turned back. "James?" "Yes?" "When you see your children today, don't try to explain everything. Don't make promises about the future. Just be present, right there in the moment with them. Children can forgive almost anything if they believe you really see them." After she left, James lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles and listening to the mechanical rhythm of the machines that had kept him alive. Through the window, he could see the afternoon sun breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the parking lot, where ordinary people were living ordinary lives filled with extraordinary love. His phone buzzed with text messages. Marcus, his business partner, confirming the preliminary sale negotiations. His assistant, rescheduling the rest of the week's meetings. Board members, expressing concern and demanding explanations. James deleted them all without reading past the first few words. Instead, he thought about Emma's laugh, the way it sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. He thought about Lucas's serious expression when he concentrated on his homework, tongue poking out slightly, just like Patricia did when she was focused. He thought about his wife's hands, how they used to trace patterns on his chest when they talked late into the night, about dreams that somehow got buried under quarterly projections. The doctor appeared just after 3, clipboard in hand and expression cautiously optimistic. "Your numbers look good, Mr. Richardson. We can discharge you with the understanding that you'll take things very slowly for the next few weeks. No stress, no heavy lifting, and absolutely no 18-hour workdays." "That won't be a problem," James said, already reaching for his clothes. "I just quit." Dr. Phillips raised an eyebrow. "Quit what?" "Everything that was killing me." 20 minutes later, James stood in the hospital parking lot, breathing autumn air that tasted like possibility. He'd called a car instead of his usual driver, choosing instead a regular taxi driven by a man named Roberto, who told stories about his grandchildren during the 40-minute ride to the suburbs. The house looked smaller than he remembered, more welcoming. The garden Patricia had planted last spring was still blooming, late-season flowers adding splashes of color to the neat walkway. A soccer ball sat forgotten on the front lawn next to Emma's pink bicycle with its basket full of imaginary treasures. James paid Roberto and stood on the sidewalk, his heart beating fast for reasons that had nothing to do with his medical condition. Through the large front window, he could see movement inside. Patricia's silhouette passed by, and then smaller figures, his children, home from school, and completely unaware that their father was about to knock on the door of his own house, like a stranger seeking shelter. He walked up the path slowly, each step a choice to move forward rather than retreat into the safe distance of wealth and work. The doorbell felt foreign under his finger, but before he could press it, the door opened. Patricia stood there, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked tired but beautiful, wearing the blue sweater he'd given her for their last anniversary, the one she'd worn maybe twice because there was never anywhere special to go. "You came," she said simply. "I said I would. You've said a lot of things over the years." Before he could respond, Emma's voice echoed from somewhere inside the house. "Mommy, who's at the door?" "It's Daddy," Patricia called back, her eyes never leaving James's face. He's come home. The sound of small feet running across hardwood floors filled the entryway. And then Emma appeared, her dark curls bouncing as she skidded to a stop beside her mother. She looked up at James with wide, cautious eyes. "Hi, Butterfly," he said softly, kneeling down to her level. Emma tilted her head, studying his face with the intense concentration only children possessed. "You look different, Daddy." "Different how?" "Less busy." The simple observation broke something open in James's chest. He opened his arms, and after a moment's hesitation, Emma stepped forward into his embrace. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and playground adventures, and when she whispered, "I missed you," against his neck, James understood that he'd been given a gift more valuable than every stock option and patent in his portfolio. Lucas appeared in the doorway, soccer cleats still on his feet, mud streaking his practice jersey. At 10, he was old enough to be more cautious, to remember the broken promises and missed games. But he was also young enough to hope. "Hey, buddy," James said, still holding Emma but extending one arm toward his son. Lucas approached slowly, and James didn't rush him. When the boy finally leaned against his father's side, James felt the weight of trust being carefully, tentatively offered. "Are you staying for dinner?" Lucas asked. "If your mother says it's okay." Patricia was watching from the doorway, arms crossed but expression softening. "We're having spaghetti and meatballs. Nothing fancy." "Perfect," James said, and meant it. As his children pulled him into the house, chattering about school and friends and the butterfly Emma had found in the garden, James caught Patricia's eye one more time. She nodded slightly, a gesture that wasn't forgiveness yet, but might be the first step toward it. The door closed behind them, shutting out the world of acquisitions and board meetings and everything that had once seemed so important. Inside, the house was warm and filled with the sounds of a family learning to be together again, one careful conversation at a time. 1 year later, James Richardson sat in the same corner booth at Maple Street Café, but everything about him had changed. The expensive suit had been replaced by jeans and a sweater Emma had picked out for him. His phone lay face down on the table, silent for the first time in years during what he now called his thinking hour, the same time slot he used to reserve for emergency board meetings. Denise approached with the coffee pot, her smile warm with recognition. "The usual, Mr. Richardson?" "Just James," he corrected gently, as he had every Tuesday for the past 6 months since he'd started this weekly ritual. "And yes, please." She poured the coffee, the steam curling between them like incense in a sacred space. The cafe hummed with its familiar energy, construction workers grabbing breakfast before their shifts, elderly couples sharing newspapers, students hunched over laptops. James had learned to find peace in this ordinary symphony of life. "How are Emma's dance classes going?" Denise asked, settling into the seat across from him for their customary few minutes of conversation before the morning rush intensified. "She's performing in the spring recital," James said, his voice carrying a pride that would have been impossible to fake a year ago. "Patricia says I cry every time she practices at home." Denise laughed, the sound rich with understanding. "Michael's been asking about soccer camp again. I keep telling him maybe next summer, but—" James reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope, placing it carefully on the table between them. The paper was thick, official, bearing the letterhead of the Richardson Foundation, a non-profit he'd established with the proceeds from selling his tech empire to a competitor who valued profit margins more than human souls. "What's this?" Denise asked, her fingers hesitating over the envelope. "Michael's college fund," James said simply. "Full scholarship to any university he chooses, plus summer enrichment programs, tutoring if he needs it, and yes, soccer camp for the next 10 years, if he wants it." Denise's hands trembled as she opened the envelope and read the documents inside. Her breath caught, and for a moment, The bustling cafe seemed to fall silent around them. When she looked up, tears were streaming down her cheeks. "James, I can't. This is too much. I never expected." "You saved my life," he said quietly. "Not just that morning when you called the ambulance. You saved my life by showing me what it means to really live." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, shaking her head. "All I did was make coffee and listen." "You did what no board of directors or team of consultants could do," James replied. "You helped me remember that success isn't measured in stock prices or quarterly reports. It's measured in Tuesday morning breakfasts with your daughter and helping with math homework and being present when your son scores his first goal." The morning rush was beginning to build, and other customers needed Denise's attention. She stood, clutching the scholarship documents, but paused before walking away. "What about you?" she asked. "Are you happy now?" James considered the question seriously. Happiness felt like too simple a word for what he'd found. Peace, maybe. Purpose, definitely. The kind of bone-deep satisfaction that came from aligning his actions with his values instead of fighting against them. "I'm home," he said finally. "For the first time in 20 years, I'm actually home." As Denise moved away to serve other customers, James pulled out his phone. Not to check emails or stock prices, but to look at the photo Emma had taken of their family last weekend. They were all piled together on the couch, Lucas showing off his latest soccer trophy, Emma demonstrating a new dance move she'd learned, Patricia laughing at something ridiculous he'd said. The image was slightly blurry because Emma was still learning how to use the camera function, but it captured something no professional photographer could have arranged: genuine joy. His calendar notification chimed softly. In an hour, he had a parent-teacher conference with Lucas's math teacher. This afternoon, he was volunteering at Emma's school library. Tonight, he and Patricia had planned to work on the vegetable garden they'd started in their backyard. A project that had begun as an attempt to teach the children about responsibility, but had evolved into something that grounded the whole family in simple, seasonal rhythms. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been nights when he'd awakened in a panic, convinced he'd made a terrible mistake in selling his company. Moments when his children had tested his commitment, pushing boundaries to see if this new version of their father would stick around when things got difficult. Conversations with Patricia, where old hurts surfaced and had to be carefully, patiently addressed. But slowly, like ice melting in spring sunshine, the family had thawed back into something recognizable. Trust had been rebuilt, not through grand gestures but through consistency. Showing up to every soccer game, reading bedtime stories without checking his phone, listening to Emma's elaborate explanations of why butterflies were the most important creatures in the world. The Richardson Foundation had become his new focus, channeling his business acumen toward causes that mattered. Childhood literacy programs, scholarships for single mothers returning to school, support for small business owners who prioritized community over profit margins. The work was challenging in different ways than running a tech empire, but it fed something in his soul that quarterly earnings reports never could. His relationship with Patricia had evolved too, moving from the sharp edges of divorce papers to something more complex and hopeful. They weren't rushing back into romance, but they were rebuilding friendship and partnership in raising their children. Some evenings, after the kids were in bed, they would sit on the back porch and talk about their dreams for the family's future. Conversations that felt revolutionary after years of discussions about schedules and logistics. James finished his coffee and left his usual generous tip, adding a note of thanks on the receipt as he always did. Walking to his car, he reflected on how much his definition of wealth had changed. A year ago, he would have measured his net worth in millions. Now, he counted it in moments. Lucas's excitement when explaining a science project, Emma's giggle during their Saturday morning pancake rituals, Patricia's surprised smile when he remembered details about her work that he would have ignored in his previous life. The drive to Lucas's school took him past the gleaming office building where his former company was headquartered. He felt no longing as he looked up at the corporate tower. Someone else was wrestling with board meetings and hostile takeovers now. Someone else was sacrificing family dinners for conference calls with investors in different time zones. At the parent-teacher conference, Mrs. Henderson shared Lucas's latest math test scores with obvious pride. "He's been working so hard this semester," she said. "He tells me his father has been helping him with homework every night." "We work on it together," James corrected gently. "He's teaching me as much as I'm teaching him." After the conference, he called Patricia to share the good news. Her laugh over the phone reminded him of the woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago, before success had made him forget how to appreciate the extraordinary nature of ordinary days. That evening, as the family worked together in their garden, James watched his children's faces in the golden hour light. Emma was carefully watering the tomato seedlings, while Lucas measured spaces between rows with scientific precision. Patricia was weeding with the focused concentration she brought to everything she cared about. "Dad," Emma said suddenly, "are you happy we moved back home?" The question caught him off guard. After the separation, he'd moved into a sterile downtown apartment that had felt more like a hotel room than a home. Moving back hadn't been automatic. It had required months of family counseling and honest conversations about what they all needed to feel safe and loved. "I'm happy we're together," he told her honestly. "This is where I belong." "Good," she said, with 6-year-old authority, "because I found 3 more butterflies today, and they need you to see them." Point. Later, after baths and stories and the nightly ritual of checking for monsters under beds, James stood in the kitchen cleaning dishes while Patricia packed lunches for the next day. The domesticity of it still felt miraculous, this ordinary Tuesday evening that represented everything he'd almost lost. "Denise mentioned you were at the café again this morning," Patricia said casually. He'd told her about his weekly visits, about the scholarship fund, about the woman who had helped him find his way back to what mattered. Patricia had suggested they invite Denise and Michael over for dinner sometime, a gesture of gratitude that spoke to her generous heart. "I needed to deliver some paperwork for the foundation," he said, "but also, I think I needed to remember." "Remember what?" He dried his hands and leaned against the counter, considering how to explain the sacred nature of those Tuesday morning conversations with Denise. "Remember that moment when everything changed, when I realized that the life I was living wasn't actually mine anymore." Patricia nodded, understanding without needing detailed explanation. She'd watched him struggle with the addiction to busyness, the way success had become a substitute for satisfaction. His collapse at Maple Street Cafe had been a physical manifestation of a spiritual crisis that had been building for years. "The kids asked me today if we were getting remarried," she said quietly. The statement hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and caution. They'd been dating again, awkwardly at first, like teenagers learning how to be together. But the foundation was different now, built on shared commitment to their family rather than shared ambition for external achievement. "What did you tell them?" "I told them that sometimes the best families are the ones that choose to be together every day, even when it's hard." She paused, then added with a small smile, "Especially when it's hard." The next morning, James woke naturally at dawn without an alarm clock, another small luxury his previous life had never allowed. Lucas was already awake, quietly reading in his bed, while Emma was arranging her stuffed animals in elaborate tea party scenarios that required intense concentration and occasional whispered conversations about butterfly migration patterns. Over breakfast, they planned the weekend: Lucas's soccer game, Emma's dance class, a family visit to the farmer's market, where Patricia wanted to find herbs for the garden. Simple pleasures that a year ago would have been interrupted by urgent phone calls or emergency meetings that weren't actually emergencies at all. James's phone buzzed with a text message from his former business partner asking if he regretted his decision to sell. The question didn't require deep contemplation. As he watched Emma demonstrate her latest dance move while Lucas cheered her on and Patricia laughed at both of them, the answer was crystal clear. He typed back a simple response: "Best decision I ever made." The Richardson Foundation was hosting its first annual scholarship awards ceremony next month, and James found himself more excited about that event than he'd ever been about product launches or acquisition announcements. Denise would be there with Michael, along with dozens of other families whose lives would be changed by educational opportunities that had once seemed impossible. But the real transformation wasn't in the lives the foundation would touch. It was in the man who had created it. James Richardson had learned that true success couldn't be measured in stock portfolios or business magazines. It lived in the trust of children, who knew their father would be there for soccer games and school plays. It flourished in marriages rebuilt on presence rather than presence. It grew in quiet moments over coffee with people who saw past wealth and status to the human soul underneath. Standing in his kitchen on that ordinary Tuesday morning, surrounded by the beautiful chaos of family life, James finally understood what Denise had tried to tell him a year ago in the hospital room. The most important things in life weren't achievements to be conquered, but relationships to be cherished. His heart, both literally and metaphorically, had never been stronger.